All right, for homework week 2, the first part of the homework is to draw 2 composition sketches. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to the um, composition sketches template, and you're going to open that up, and you're going to print 2 of these composition sketches. You can also download them to your desktop and then print them. And those are 8 by 10s, so they're full scale. You're going to print 2 of those, and then using the your storyline and the objects from your story that appear in there and just the general storyline, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to draw a scene from your storyline, something that captures the overall essence of your storyline. And I'll show you an example of a composition sketch here. And in this composition sketch, what we find is that it's drawn in contour format. Basically, the major outlines are what's drawn. There's not a lot of shading going on in here. It's just the major parts outlining the shape of these objects. Okay, so you're going to want to remember to work in contour format. Now I'm going to close this up. Okay. And if you're not quite sure on how to do the composition sketch, what to include, what not to include, you may want to take a look at some of the student examples to get inspired. Now I'm going to go through a few of these examples and give you a brief lecture on composition. I'm also going to look at the assignment sheet simultaneously because in the assignment sheet there's an area on composition to give you a good sense of what it is that you should address in your composition to make sure that you have a strong composition. Okay, so I'm going to go into the assignment sheet and I'm going to go ahead and open that up. It's going to open up in a separate page. And I'm going to go to the area that talks about composition, and that's this area here. So I'm just going to go ahead and zoom in into this area. Okay. And then I'm going to pull this off to the side of the page here a bit. Okay. And we're going to talk about bleeding a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and click on this example here. And bleeding is this idea that things go off the side of the page, that they're not always trying to be included inside the page. So we have, for instance, this gingerbread house here, and we know that it has a roof even though the roof is not drawn. Always trying to include things inside isn't a good idea. It's better to bleed things off the space because the viewer automatically assumes that if this gingerbread house is cut off, then it must extend beyond that space. And if that extends beyond the space, there's probably something else like another gingerbread house or a road down the way or a pond or something. So they kind of imagine what is beyond the space. Okay. It also makes it look less like a lineup where you have 1, 2, 3 things all included inside the space. Instead, we get this nice extension of objects falling off the page so that we assume that things continue beyond what we're seeing. Okay, so that is bleeding. We're going to go back into the assignment sheet here. Hierarchy. Hierarchy means that you have things that are larger, medium, and then smaller. That you have this kind of differentiation between things that are small or far away in space and things that are large or big because they are close to the foreground, close to the viewer. Okay, so for instance, this pig is larger because it is closer to our viewing space. Okay, so it lets us know that it's closer to us. Whereas trees, which are normally bigger than pigs, here it's smaller because they're further back in space. Okay, so not only do we get this sense of space from the different hierarchy here, we also get just kind of a visually more interesting composition as to what we should focus on. It kind of becomes in our foreground. When things are too equal, you have the issue where things become too the same in size, where our eye can't rest or focus on looking at one thing. All the things on the page start competing for attention. So make sure that you include some larger objects, some smaller objects, and try to choose them where things that are in the foreground tend to be larger and things in the background tend to be smaller. You want this differentiation of foreground and background and also just variation in size, okay, for hierarchy. All right, let's go back to the assignment sheet here. We're going to look at perspective. There should be a clear way that we're looking at things. For instance, we'll click on this example here. It's almost like when we're looking at this, that we're looking at it from a, like, not complete bird's eye view, but maybe like as someone who's sitting up in the tree, a little bird sitting up in the tree. It's kind of from a higher angle. It's not from the ground level. And you can choose whatever point of view that you want, but whatever way you choose it, all of the things that you draw should be in that perspective. So it shouldn't be like I'm looking at everything from the top and then all of a sudden I see some objects that it looks like I'm looking at them from the side. But all of these, like, I tend to see little bit of the top object, it's pretty clear that I'm up above this scene that is happening when I'm viewing it. Okay, we'll go here. We've got color. I'll just keep this example up. Now just make sure that it's executed in color. We don't really want black and whites. Try to choose colors that go nicely with one another. Okay, try to pick colors where you can see how there's a little bit of darker here and a little bit of lighter. Choose colors where you can differentiate, and notice that this still stands out from the back even though this is also green. Just make sure that you provide nice color range so that things pop off from each other, and that also the colors have a nice feel and that they go nicely together. Okay? All right, now unity. Unity is this idea that you can either use this idea of repetition or continuation or proximity. And with unity, it's just that all of the objects, even if they're, we'll take a look at this instance here. Even though these objects are set apart from where the action is here and these are here, you notice that there's still this repetition of sushi rolls. So we're maintaining that repetition so that it all feels related, like we know why we're in this scene. And even though these are farther apart from this sets, you have them grouping and grouping so that things become familiar. There's no place in this composition where things feel like they don't belong in the space because they're either too far apart from each other, or there's not like this direct straight line here that divides this side of the competition and this side of the composition. We want everything to kind of go nicely together, but we do want things to be, you know, separate from one another, but we want everything to kind of make sense why it belongs together, because we have this idea that we're repeating the types of objects that we're seeing, and also that we're keeping them far away enough where they don't bunch up in one area, but also close enough where they don't tend to look like it's a separate, totally separate composition. Okay? And now emphasis, we'll take a look at, we'll look at this example here. When we look at emphasis, we're trying to see where the action is happening. Now we'll notice here is that if I asked you what's the focal point, where's the action happening, where our artist probably wants the viewer to look, and I would say it's all in here. We want it to be for them to be looking at where she is biting on the object and just really like enjoying this fantasy Candyland world that she's in. Okay, now there's all these other little objects back here just basically helping fill the space or helping the viewer understand that they're in a Candyland. Okay, this is this idea of similarity. We're repeating this object so it gives context to the storyline, and those are fine and dandy, and they're bleeding off the space and they're great and colorful. But the action, the focal point, the part that the viewer really wants you to focus on is in here. And they've made it larger, they've put it in your foreground, and they've also made it where the action is happening. This is where something is being eaten. Okay? So that's the use of emphasis. And then we'll take a look at balance. Okay? We're going to go and we'll take a look at this one. All right, so for this one, we'll notice if we look at this composition that we have a lot of eggs here. These are actually supposed to be bullet, a Filipino dish. These are the eggs that are all down here. You'll notice there's a lot of area here that's being filled. This area, what this is doing is it's kind of weighting the composition a little to the left and down at the bottom. And that's okay. Everything doesn't have to be completely equal. Just because you put a man on the left-hand side doesn't mean you have to put a man on the right-hand side. What's key is that you balance composition by placing things in somewhat opposite edges so that it helps balance the composition, or that you design the opposite edge somehow that it balances. So even though we have a high concentration of eggs down here, which might weight it, we have on this right-hand side, we have this action that's kind of, you know, these things have been cracked and we know that something happened here, right? But also more importantly, we have directly across on the top right, as opposed to the bottom left, we have this guy who is demanding attention. He is their ruler. He's the one that's cheering him on and telling him we can do it and whatnot. And there's just different object back here, this other guy who's sitting back here. And because he's different, he also draws attention. So this area, because this guy is by himself and so important, and on the top right, he helps balance this left concentration of eggs down here. Okay, so this is balance. This is asymmetrical balance. It doesn't have to be equal. I don't have to put an egg and a man over here because there's an egg and a man over here. Okay, you can do that if the composition makes sense. But here for the storyline, there was this ruler and this leader who was talking to his other, bullet, and wanted to, that was part of the story. So it was important that he be here alone and kind of at the top of the composition. So when you have that and you need this kind of singular person in one area that demands attention, then you should try to find a way to balance the composition by putting something else that's equally weighted on the other side. It doesn't have to be the same, just equally weighted where it balances out the composition. Okay? All right, so this concludes your lecture on composition. We're going to move on to the second part of the homework, okay?